alarm bell rings, same thing every day. They'll answer the phone, I'm not home, I'm already on my way. Out the door, down the street, got to keep me on my feet. I got coffee, I got donuts, in the office down the street. And the fat hat lady's faking a heart attack. And my manager yelling at me, say, can't give her money back. Bank called, the notice overdue. And that's just one more thing I gotta do. Till I get on the air. Till I get on the air. 12 o'clock, the lunch bell rings. Same thing every day. You better answer the phone in the proper tone. Yes, sir, whatever you say. Right on time, on the time. Got to keep me on my feet. I got contracts, I got lawyers in the office down the street. Bank jam is backing up, more than I can stand. Things ain't working out the way I had them planned. Bank call the meeting, just a drink or two. That's just one more thing I gotta do. Till I get off the air. Till I get off the air.
Hello, everyone. And so I want to start off with the same chant that I've been using for a while now. It's called Ehoi Mai, and it calls from a deep ancestral past where we all are, in fact, family. And anyway, it calls for the ancestors to come and bring their knowledge to us and be with us. Okay, bear with me. Ehoi mai kahiki mai mai o nā mea una no iau e ia oe ehoi mai ehoi mai ehoi mai ehoi mai kahiki mai lua mai o nā mea una no iau o lahui ehoi mai ehoi mai ehoi mai ehoi mai kahiki mai luna mai o nā mea una no iau o nā poe ehoi mai ehoi mai ehoi mai. Okay, shucks. Oh yeah, okay. Good morning. Now we're off to Heather.
Thank you very much, Hank, for bringing us together in this virtual space with your chant this morning. Welcome, everybody. We're happy that you've joined us again today for this installment of our virtual Rising Voices 8 meeting. Today, we're focusing on health systems. I'm Heather Lazarus from the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and together with Julie Maldonado from the Livelihood Knowledge Exchange Network and support from the Olohana Foundation and Lomikai Media, we'll proceed into our conversation about health systems today. And as folks are joining the YouTube chat, please feel free to introduce yourself, say hello to everybody in the chat there. And as everybody knows, the Rising Voices program facilitates intercultural, relational-based approaches for understanding and adapting to extreme weather and climate events, climate variability, and climate change. And we think of these topics is all very interconnected and holistic. And so within that certainly is our approach to health and our individual health, our community health, and the health of our non-human relatives. So today I want to thank Michelle Montgomery, who unfortunately can't join us today, and Mike Chang very much for their leadership on this topic. In these virtual sessions, we obviously think about the topic at hand around health systems and how this interconnects with all the other conversations we've had over the course of the last 7 or so months of doing these virtual webinars. So we'll have an opportunity to go into a breakout group and discuss this theme in more detail. Shortly, I'll hand things over to Julie and Mike in a moment, and then we'll go into the breakout group sessions if you follow the Zoom link in the emails that Julie has sent. If you need help, please email help, HELP, at lomikai, LOMIKAI.com, and Mariah can give you a hand. And then after the breakout session, we'll meet back together again here in the YouTube channel. And with that, thank you all, and over to you, Julie.
Thank you to Hank and Heather and the whole group here today. It's great to be with everyone today. Always love coming back to this family. And just gonna, talk through a little bit about kind of, obviously the goal, the purpose today is to come together for the health working group session, where, as Heather mentioned, we're going to continue to build from what's emerged from previous working group discussions and the health panel session that happened earlier in the month to really help inform today's conversation that's focused on climate-related impacts to health, considerations of particular challenges, thinking about COVID in particular and how that's related to climate or other environmental factors, thinking about how we respond to these changes and really bring our whole selves into this work and into collaborations. So I'll also kind of set the scene today, reminder from last year's Rising Voices workshop from the health working during that workshop last summer. The health group, there were several health groups that came together for dialogue really focused on individual, community, and cultural health, including physical and mental, social, and spiritual health. So we're saying health that it's encompassing all of these various components and water. The groups discussed really the importance of things like food sovereignty and that access to healthy cultural and traditional foods and activities, such as ceremonies and acts of gathering, is critical to Indigenous health. And the effects being felt from the loss of traditional subsistence species, weather extremes as a result of climate, interaction of Superfund sites and cancer rates within reservations, for example, and really the need to bridge the gap between mental, cultural, spiritual, and physical health. And, keeping in mind that health has different meaning to each person, each context, and there's a diverse nature of health in communities, so too are those impacts and stressors and indicators also diverse. And that there's various Indigenous definitions of health that incorporate the human connection with the land or the sea that the person inhabits and dwells within. And with that comes ideas around health sovereignty and the inherent right to really define and decide the interconnected identities in those spaces. And the health of the society really can be determined by the health of those who have been put most at risk. And we need to really, consider some of the key takeaways the group discussed, really considering how do we change and challenge funding mechanisms to recognize the importance of relationships in program development, implementation, and sustainability. There's really an issue in this gap between kind of who controls health narratives and this loss of aspects like cultural resources and identity and health sovereignty. And, really to do this work in a collaborative way, in a good way, that we all need to carry responsibility to one another. Everyone has layers of identity we must recognize and come together as, a dynamic team and see one another. really see each other. And that reciprocity is key to really making these intercultural scientific collaborations more relational. Thinking about strategies that can be developed once everyone has been heard through clear communication, understanding, and the deep conversations that we need to be having together on aspects like data sovereignty, on developing structures of accountability in science. The rewording of science really into thinking about knowledge and relationships and connections is key. And that we all have our own ways of knowing that we will grow, and feeding that here in this community and taking it home and cultivating it is really important. And thinking about how, we have to go, the groups talked about really going to the roots of the structural inequalities that are causing these issues, that, you can't just give people medicine if they are sick. We need to understand why they are sick, what is happening in society that's enabling that, and that science needs structures of accountability to participate in these processes. And keeping in mind, that while we all come from different places and backgrounds, we are here together as family, and feeling that sense of emotion and connection, and that we hold ourselves accountable and responsible for the establishment of a robust, ongoing learning, exchange, and cross-cultural relationship and connection building based on who we are and the spaces in which we occupy, especially thinking about the institutions, agencies, and organizations involved and engaged. And so those were some of the key discussion points from last year's conversation, bringing us up until now. And I'd like to turn it over to Mike, who will share some reflections from the this year's health panel session that took place a couple of weeks ago. So over to you, Mike.
Great. Great. Thanks, Julie, Heather, and Hank for kicking us off and introducing this. And thanks to everyone for being here, attending this virtually. I'm sad that we can't do this in person, but it's still nice that we're able to connect during these times as well. So I'm just going to go through kind of a summary of what we talked about at our panel session, which was, I think, about a week and a half ago now. And if you want to watch the full panel session, there's a YouTube link as well that we can put in the chat. And so, first of all, I just, before I begin, I just really want to thank the 5 speakers that we had at this panel session. And these include John Doyle, who's a Crow Elder and Water Quality Director at Little Bighorn College, Valerie Segrest, who's with the Native American Agricultural Fund, Jackie Catalina Schaefer with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, Leslie Iawakea, who's a sea level rise and relocation consultant from the island of Maui, Hawaii, and David Rico, who's an urban farmer at Sovereign Earthworks. And so with our speakers, we really prompted them with 4 specific questions for them to reflect on. The first one is, considering people's health, what climate-related changes are most currently impactful and important to you, your work, and your community? The second question is, considering COVID-19 in particular, what particular challenges are you or your community experiencing? Are any of these challenges exacerbated by or related to climate and or other environmental factors or pre-existing situations? The third question is, how do you see Indigenous knowledges, sciences, and sovereignty responding to these changes? And then the fourth one, which I think in my reflection of the notes really related to the third question we prompted, is, how do you or we bring our whole selves to this work? And how does that inform our collaborations and responses to these changes? So I'll go through kind of some of the key takeaways that I felt like really resonated with me across the speakers. So in response to the first question, climate change is already affecting people's health and well-being. There was a lot of discussion about how changes in both water supply and water quality affect the water availability for homes across Indian country. There's also a story that John Doyle shared about some of his colleagues were able to walk across one of the rivers without getting their feet wet this year. And I think that's a story that I think we're hearing more and more frequently nowadays as well. Something else that has emerged in previous RVs as well are what are some of the seasonal and phenological impacts. A lot of warmer temperatures and shifting water and precipitation patterns are affecting both the plant communities and some of the harvesting practices as well. This year, especially, I think there has been a lot of smoke and toxic air quality, which has also affected harvesting and hunting seasons for Indigenous peoples as well. And there's discussion about how inundation from storms and sea level rise are disrupting burial grounds. And climate change overall has been affecting cultural foods in multiple aspects, which has been forcing Indigenous peoples to eat food and foods that aren't conducive to their health and well-being. Since it is 2020, and I don't think we can have a discussion about health and well-being and livelihoods without talking about COVID-19. COVID-19 also really emerged across all of the speakers' words as well. And I think COVID-19 is being felt deeply across and within many Indigenous communities. Multiple people commented how there has been an unprecedented loss of elders and the Indigenous knowledges that they hold. There's also a lot of conversations about multi-generational homes, where there are homes with multiple people living with them, and what are some of the considerations, policies, safety concerns that come with the realities of that. COVID-19 is also disrupting harvesting, hunting, and fishing seasons. And some of our speakers mentioned stories about them no longer being able to travel to their homelands to being able to harvest, hunt, and fish. And combined with that, I think one of the things is anxiety, grief, stress from these situations can compound both from climate change and COVID-19. And from a policy standpoint, food relief and assistance and relief and assistance in general is really forefront along all of these. However, there were some speakers that expressed just the frustration of federal systems and policies where tribes aren't built into them. For example, the Federal Emergency Food Assistance Program. And lastly, and I think this goes into kind of this third category I want to speak to, is that oftentimes when we think of how do we become healthier or more well, being with each other, being with family and relatives is a critical part of Indigenous health and wellness. But however, these types of opportunities to be in communion and in relation with folks, at least in person, has been disrupted. And that has had a very big impact in terms of how do people seek medicine, how do people seek connection, and how do people become healthier and more well during these times. And lastly, I'm going to combine the last two questions together because I think a lot of these takeaways really complement each other about how do Indigenous knowledge, science, and sovereignty, a way of practicing and a way of being. Speakers talked about starting with ourself. How do we live in a way each day that acknowledges the world we live in and how we're connected with everything? Again, this theme of being with family and being of relatives also means being in good health. And that's an important part of many different cultures. There's also acknowledgement that people who are health practitioners are in the health field, that self-care and self-love is important to also take care of themselves. And when it comes to the history of indigenous knowledges, there are multiple speakers that commented that there have been thousands of years of resilience, of practicing, and how do we tap into that and leverage that alongside modern approaches to become more resilient and to move towards progress in the future. And the last point is this point of that the lands, the waters, the air, that's our legacy to future generations. And so being in the space, interacting with the space, working in the space means how can we begin to understand the systems, unpack them, dismantle them in a way that enhances the health, the well-being, and the livelihoods for Indigenous peoples and communities for generations to come. So that was the summary. I hope that wasn't too much to absorb in one sitting. And so I think there's a link that is shared in the chat where you can watch the full panel session. I highly recommend it. I felt like I was extremely humbled. I had goosebumps multiple times throughout, and it was just a really powerful group of speakers. And so now I guess I'll transition. Maybe Heather or others know, but we're going to transition now from this to breakout groups for some more interactive discussions with everyone. And so there should be a link being sent out shortly through multiple communication channels. So check out your email, the chat, social media for some of these so you can join the breakout groups. So I'll hand it back over to Heather.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike. That was an amazing summary. And so at this point, yes, everyone can please follow the Zoom link that will be in emails that have come from you, to you from Julie, and we'll meet over in Zoom. So we'll see you there. Thank you.